Why did President Ibrahim Traore order 100 tons of grain seeds to be released from helicopters over the parched savanna of Burkina Faso? At first, it was nothing more than whispers in the bustling markets of Ouagadougou, rumors of military helicopters flying low, rotors kicking up clouds of Sahel dust. But instead of soldiers or weapons, they carried massive crates brimming with seeds, maize, millet, peanuts, cassava, wheat. A strange and surreal sight, for in a land where planting was usually done by hand, seed by seed, the sky itself now rained down a storm of life and uncertainty. Many assumed it was a relief mission, perhaps funded by a foreign agency. But the truth, carefully guarded within the presidential palace, was far more audacious. Traore himself had approved one of the most ambitious agricultural experiments in African history, an aerial seed drop designed not just to fight hunger, but to assert national sovereignty. Officially, the operation was described as a humanitarian mission to counter a devastating third year of drought and erratic rainfall that had left both people and wildlife struggling. But behind the humanitarian veil lay a deeper calculation: to break free from dependency on imported grain, to revive degraded ecosystems, and to spark an agricultural revolution capable of reshaping Burkina Faso's economic and political destiny. This was more than agriculture. It was a gamble with layers of political, economic, and geopolitical meaning. The costs were staggering: chartering military helicopters, sourcing drought-resistant seeds from across the region, and coordinating hundreds of drop zones across the country. Ministers voiced unease about the strain on state finances, already burdened by defense and infrastructure. International development partners were furious at being sidelined. Meanwhile, grain exporters in Europe and North America sensed a threat to their lucrative dominance over African markets. Critics ridiculed the plan as an expensive spectacle that would end up feeding birds instead of people. Yet Traore was not improvising. Working quietly with African agronomists, he had chosen seed varieties with precision: fast germinating millet to provide forage within weeks, deep-rooted cassava able to endure poor soils for months, hardy maize hybrids capable of producing harvests with minimal rain. Seeds were not scattered randomly but strategically distributed across ecological zones where they would complement each other instead of competing. The genius of the plan lay not only in science, but in politics. By relying solely on domestic resources and regional cooperation, Traore denied foreign aid agencies the ability to control the narrative. By framing the mission as both food security and wildlife conservation, he made foreign opposition politically toxic. To attack the plan was to appear opposed to feeding the hungry or saving endangered species. Still, the enemies of food sovereignty did not stay idle. Grain lobbies in Europe and North America raised alarms about ecological risks, while hinting darkly about market destabilization. Foreign media circulated satellite images of barren savanna, mocking the initiative as little more than political theater. Inside Burkina Faso, opposition parties spread rumors that the seeds were expired stock from the black market, or worse, genetically altered varieties that would poison the soil. Radio call-ins and cafe chatter amplified suspicion, feeding the climate of doubt. But in the rural provinces, where desperation outweighed cynicism, farmers and herders lifted their eyes to the skies, praying for a sign. On the 12th night, that sign arrived. Dark clouds gathered from the northeast, winds shifted, and heavy rain began to fall. For hours, steady showers drenched the parched earth from Mali's borders to the lowlands of the southwest. When dawn broke, tiny green shoots pierced the soil. Across the Sahel belt, millet sprouted into wide swaths, drawing gazelles and cattle back to graze. In the floodplains, cassava sent deep roots into the earth, while in the west, rows of maize stretched upward in defiance of drought. This was no miracle. It was the product of microclimate mapping, where each seed was matched to the exact soil, wind, and humidity most likely to ensure survival. Scientists at the National Agricultural Research Institute recorded germination rates far exceeding laboratory projections, sometimes over 80%. Reports were sent encrypted to the palace, avoiding foreign eyes. But the fragile hope was soon tested. In the eastern province of Gorma, a storage depot of surplus seeds went up in flames under the cover of night. Witnesses described men speaking foreign languages fleeing toward the border. Military intelligence traced the sabotage to mercenaries on the payroll of an international agribusiness recently cut off from Burkina Faso's import contracts. The fire was more than an act of arson. It was a warning that this struggle was not about crops alone, but about power, and those who profited from Africa's dependency would not surrender without a fight. The tender green shoots had barely risen before Burkina Faso faced its first invisible assaults. The fire at the Gorma seed depot was not just a loss of supplies. It was proof that this battle would not remain confined to agriculture. Traore understood that his aerial seeding had struck at the heart of powerful interests that thrived on Africa's dependency. What began as a gamble on food security had become a political and economic battleground, where each blade of grass was a challenge to the established order. While Western media mocked the plan with satellite images of barren soil and headlines calling it Traore's folly, opposition forces in Ouagadougou spread rumors with feverish intensity. They claimed the government had purchased expired seeds, and some whispered about dangerous genetically modified strains designed to poison the soil. In the city's cafes, accusations of corruption filled the airwaves. On the radio, anonymous voices stoked fear and suspicion. In the markets, traders repeated stories that the fields would soon become wastelands. Yet in the countryside, among villagers hardened by years of drought, skepticism was outweighed by desperation. Farmers and herders still bent close to the earth, watching the sprouts with cautious hope, praying that irregular rains might rewrite their fate. And then, improbably, the rains came again. Scattered showers, never enough to transform the Sahel into paradise, but sufficient to sustain fragile life. Germination rates continued to exceed projections. Secret reports sent to the presidential palace described numbers unseen in similar conditions of drought. But the shadow war escalated. One night in the eastern borderlands, a second seed reserve went up in flames. Witnesses described foreign men speaking in strange tongues, fleeing into the darkness toward the frontier. Military intelligence traced the sabotage to a multinational agribusiness recently cut off from Burkina Faso's import contracts. The arson was not only destruction, it was a warning. Any challenge to the old order would be met with ruthless retaliation. In response, Traore convened an emergency meeting in the underground war room of the palace. Maps covered the walls, marked with rainfall projections, soil quality charts, and migration routes of both people and animals. After hearing the reports, he spoke with calm determination. If the rains come, we will feed ourselves. If they do not, the roots will hold our soil and our hope until they do. Either way, we no longer beg for bread at another's table. That resolve was swiftly translated into action. Military units were dispatched to guard the most promising zones. Replacement seed stocks were distributed to fill the gaps. And in a daring diplomatic maneuver, Traore sent discreet envoys to Mali, Niger, and Ghana with a bold proposal. Join Burkina Faso in the aerial seeding initiative and commit to sourcing the bulk of regional grain from African producers rather than foreign imports. It was a masterstroke of political judo, turning a domestic gamble into a Pan-African project, making it exponentially harder for hostile powers to strike without appearing to punish an entire region. Meanwhile, in the villages, life began to shift. Herds of cattle grazed on grass that had not grown in years. Children played beside rows of young maize. Herders smiled as fragile millet shoots promised enough forage to carry their animals through the season. Each seedling was more than food. It was a symbol of sovereignty. And precisely because of this, the opposition abroad grew more desperate. Intelligence leaks revealed closed-door meetings in Europe, where officials discussed ways to prevent Burkina Faso from proving its success. For them, if Traore's plan worked, the model could spread across Africa, threatening billions in profits from the global grain trade. The green fields, spreading across the land, began to change the mood of the nation. From remote villages to the streets of Ouagadougou, people started to believe that Traore's audacious gamble might actually succeed. On state television, drone footage captured shimmering maize fields under the sun, carpets of millet swaying in the wind, and peanuts covering the once cracked soil. These images were broadcast nationwide, igniting a wave of optimism unlike anything seen in years. But with hope came danger. The National Intelligence Service intercepted encrypted transmissions originating from Abidjan. The message was brief, but chilling. The harvest must not happen. Stop it at the source. Piecing together further fragments, it became clear that the objective was not merely to destroy crops, but to eliminate people, the key figures driving the strategy. And without needing names, everyone in the palace understood who the primary target was: President Traore. Assassination was no stranger to Burkina Faso. Just a year earlier, a team of mercenaries disguised as a humanitarian convoy had attempted to infiltrate the capital with the intent to kill him. That plot had failed, but it left scars of vigilance. Security protocols were tightened immediately. Public appearances were slashed, decoy convoys deployed, and inspection tours conducted in unmarked helicopters, while the official aircraft flew in opposite directions. Yet Traore refused to vanish into shadows. In a bold move, he appeared unannounced in the small town of Djibo, walking openly through millet fields, shaking hands with farmers, and speaking directly to them. "No one owns this sky except the people of Burkina Faso," he declared, a pointed rebuke to the foreign surveillance drones that had circled overhead weeks before. The visit electrified the countryside, turning fields into symbols of defiance and courage. Opponents realized that striking him in the capital risked igniting chaos, while in the countryside he was shielded by popular devotion. So the methods of sabotage shifted. Bags of seed prepared for the next aerial drop in Mali were discovered laced with a chemical treatment that rendered them sterile. The compound was sophisticated, unavailable on African markets. Forensic analysis traced it back to a European supplier with ties to an international grain cartel. Publicly, Traore remained silent. Privately, he ordered the launch of Operation Iron Canopy, a covert sweep to identify and expel all foreign operatives posing as agricultural consultants and NGO staff. Within 3 weeks, 14 foreign advisors were quietly escorted to the border, their laptops and satellite phones confiscated for analysis. Inside their files, palace analysts uncovered contracts and wire transfers linking them directly to lobbying groups that had been demanding sanctions against Burkina Faso since the day the seed drop was announced. The struggle was no longer confined to fields. Pressure mounted on diplomatic and economic fronts. Burkina Faso's gold exports to Europe were suddenly delayed under new compliance rules. 2 major regional banks froze development loans, citing vague governance concerns. At the United Nations in New York, a closed-door meeting of the Food Security Council, ostensibly convened to discuss drought in the Sahel, devolved into a thinly veiled interrogation about the legality of aerial environmental interventions. Every lever of influence was being pulled to strangle Burkina Faso before its fields could bear fruit. The political and economic assaults from abroad grew relentless, but Traore refused to yield. Instead of bowing to pressure, he pivoted strategically. Burkina Faso redirected gold exports toward Asian buyers, bypassing European financial systems. A barter agreement with Turkey was sealed, farm equipment in exchange for sesame oil. From Egypt, drought-resistant wheat seeds arrived disguised as part of a cultural exchange, slipping past trade monitors. While outsiders sought to isolate him, Traore quietly wove new alliances, proving step by step that Burkina Faso could survive and thrive without the patronage of the great powers. But the enemy's ambitions went beyond economic paralysis. Urgent intelligence revealed that a foreign explosives expert had slipped across the northern border, targeting the central grain depot at Kaya, which held 40% of the expected harvest. A single blast could erase months of effort. Traore responded with icy composure. Instead of declaring panic, he ordered a decoy operation. Thousands of grain sacks were moved under cover of night to hidden depots, leaving only sandbags and dried grass under tarps. When the explosion lit up the night sky, foreign media rushed to declare a food catastrophe. But the next morning, Traore appeared on national television, standing before untouched reserves, smiling faintly. Our enemies think in terms of destruction. We think in terms of protection. What might have been a devastating blow became a morale-boosting triumph. The world began to take notice. International organizations, however reluctant, could not deny that Burkina Faso had withstood the storm. Yet the adversaries had not surrendered. They knew the most dangerous moment would arrive at harvest. If the crops were successfully gathered, it would serve as irrefutable proof that an African nation could break free from dependency through political will and ingenuity. Thus, sabotage plots grew more elaborate than ever, bribing local officials to delay grain collection, threatening truck drivers with death, deploying fake traders offering inflated prices to lure farmers into smuggling across borders, and even schemes to poison irrigation canals. Facing unprecedented peril, Traore convened his war council in the fortified underground chamber of the palace. The air was thick with the scent of strong coffee and dust carried on soldiers' boots. Gazing at maps flickering on digital screens, he spoke with firm resolve. We will not defend crops as fragile things. We will defend them as we defend our flag. Immediately, Operation Harvest Shield was launched. Armored convoys escorted grain trucks. Special forces embedded in villages in plain clothes. Irrigation channels were sealed and rerouted through hidden pipes installed months earlier as part of a contingency plan. In Ouagadougou's markets, undercover agents posed as grain buyers, tracking and arresting middlemen attempting to siphon harvests out of the country. The more the enemy revealed itself, the sharper the tension became. On the eastern border, a convoy of humanitarian aid trucks was intercepted. Inside were industrial chemicals labeled as cooking oil, potent enough to poison thousands of hectares. In the west, a clandestine airstrip had been prepared for a firebombing run against the largest maize belt. Both plots were dismantled before execution, but the message was unmistakable. This was no longer about seeds. It was about a nation's right to determine its own destiny. As the last rains faded and the Sahel sun blazed over ripening fields, Burkina Faso entered its decisive hour. From the skies, golden seas of maize stretched to the horizon, peanuts carpeted the earth, and millet shimmered in the wind. On state television, these images played on repeat, transforming the harvest into a national symbol. In villages, people sang around evening fires, children laughed in fields, and farmers whispered that they were witnessing the rebirth of the land itself. Yet at the very moment of hope, intelligence reports flooded in. The final, most desperate attempts to sabotage the harvest were underway. This time, the tactics were more insidious. Local officials were bribed to stall collection. Truck drivers were threatened with death if they dared move grain. At border markets, fake traders appeared, offering impossibly high prices to lure farmers into selling across frontiers. Most alarming, secret sources revealed a plot to poison the irrigation canals, sustaining the most fertile crop zones. Traore raised the nation's alert to its highest level. Operation Harvest Shield entered its most intense phase. Armored vehicles escorted convoys, special forces embedded in villages, and the main irrigation channels were sealed and rerouted through hidden pipes prepared months earlier. In Ouagadougou's bustling markets, undercover agents posed as merchants, dismantling entire networks of middlemen seeking to drain the harvest abroad. Sensing their window closing, the enemy turned reckless. On the eastern border, a convoy of humanitarian trucks was intercepted, packed not with food, but industrial chemicals labeled as cooking oil, enough to poison thousands of hectares. In the west, a clandestine airstrip had been prepared for a firebombing run on the maize belt. Both plots were dismantled before they could launch, but their sheer audacity revealed the desperation of those unwilling to let Africa's independence take root. 3 days before the official harvest, Traore made a bold choice. He did not speak from the safety of the capital, but appeared live from the fields of Kaya, flanked by farmers, soldiers, and herders, with ripened crops stretching behind him. "This is not only Burkina Faso's harvest," he declared. "This is Africa's harvest, and it will not be stolen." The broadcast echoed across the continent, aired by sympathetic channels from Bamako to Dar es Salaam. Within hours, volunteer militias and village defense groups mobilized, forming human walls around the fields. They carried no weapons, only resolve, ready to guard the crops with their bodies. In the final hour, the enemy launched its last strike, a bombing plot along the main highway to the central storage hub, intended to strand the grain in the fields and let it rot. But a fatal miscalculation doomed them. The explosives detonated along a decoy route. The real convoys had already slipped through secret paths, shielded by a sudden dust storm that seemed almost conjured by the land itself. By nightfall, the first trucks rolled into storage complexes, their beds piled high with sacks of grain. The air was thick with the scent of fresh maize, and with it came an undeniable truth. The gamble was no longer a gamble, it was victory. In Western capitals, the media grudgingly called it a logistical feat under hostile conditions. But in Burkina Faso's villages, people spoke of it simply as the year the land fought back. For Traore, victory was not only measured in tons of grain or herds fattened on new grass, but in the shift he felt within his people, the knowledge that they were no longer victims of charity, but authors of their own survival. The aerial seed drop, once derided as reckless spectacle, had become the opening chapter of a campaign to redefine agriculture as a weapon of independence. And as he walked between the grain sacks under the glare of floodlights, Traore knew the war was far from over. But for the first time in decades, the nation would not fight on an empty stomach. And in Africa's quiet war for sovereignty, that was the most dangerous victory of all.